Well, welcome to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. I'm your host, Big Tom Perkins, along with Dr. Cameron Meyerly. And today we're joined by our good friend Dan Ulry of Ulry Farms, as well as White Gate Fence Company. But his most important job of the weekend, he was Cam and I's personal chauffeur. He drove us from Ohio all the way down to Cooksville, Tennessee. He did a pretty good job. He didn't leave us anywhere, but
Yeah,
I
we
would say
we
this if
didn't get
it hadn't been
stuck.
for Dan.
Didn't get stuck in Beckley.
Did he
So
get stuck
that's
in
like
Beckley? He didn't even go near Beckley.
it's our first criteria on any trip.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a fun trip. We've talked about the EAPK annual symposium. This was the fourth annual symposium, and certainly talked about it on here. And last year we did a recap. We figured we'd do a recap again today, and coming off fresh from the weekend.
Mhm.
Um, and that was, Daniel's part of that sale committee as well. Volunteers within EAPK to make sure that sale goes off without a hitch. Um, we were, I would say we were joking because it was in fun, but we mentioned we were going to get him a sash, like the MVP of the sale, or some type of trophy like friend of the barn, because there was a lot of stuff behind the scenes that, while other people were running around doing stuff, Daniel was out in the pens numbering all of the lots in the pen,
Yep.
and like nobody asked him to do it. I talked to him a couple weeks ago. He had done it last year, and then this year he's like, I think I can make this better by, this, and this. And so, it's encouraging. You don't have to ask him to go and do something to make it work. He just goes and does it. So it was, again, from EAPK, from buyers, consigners, just extend a thank you to Daniel on his efforts on that sale. It definitely was improved with
Yeah,
with
Dan,
what you're
Dan
doing.
came up and asked me if I'd help him do the numbers. And I said yes. And then I went and hid. And when I came back, he had them all done.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah, I stepped into the classroom Friday evening, and by the time I came out, he had everything done. It was like, oh my goodness, he must have been flying. And if you weren't in attendance, putting numbers on sheep doesn't sound so bad until you realize that whoever manufactured the gates at the venue we were at wasn't thinking when they put the crossbar over the top of the gate. And so
Yeah.
you either have to duck down under 3 feet, or it's probably more than that, because it was, for me to step over it,
Yep.
it was a health hazard. And so I don't know, I mean, were you slipping in and out of gates, or were you just hurdling fences the whole afternoon?
Luckily, I have some long arms, so for the most part, I could reach over. Now, the pins of three, we had to climb in and out, and I'm more of going over, and they were pretty tall gates.
They were
So,
they were tall gates, but yeah, it was. Just wanted to extend a thank you, and try to let people know everything that you did behind the scenes. But tell us a little bit,
I
about
appreciate it. Thank
the
you.
farm. Yeah, tell us a little bit about the farm. And one of the things we talked about quite a bit on the road was you recently became a timeless fence dealer, and maybe a little bit about what you offer, and we'll get you a little bit of advertising. I don't know if I'll be your
Yeah,
first customer, but I hope to be a good customer. So so go for it.
yeah. Well, thank you guys for having me on. First time caller, long time listener,
Yeah.
and uh, thoroughly enjoyed our weekend and our time together in the car. Um, it's not too often that you get a haul around two famous podcasters in your vehicle with you. So Tom. Luckily, we have a 1-ton truck, so we could get Tom's head in there after all of the fans came up adoring him all weekend. We were able to get him back home. So
It
I'm
was a
glad of
tight
that.
fit. It was a
It
tight
was.
fit.
It
If
was.
the Wendy's franchise does not know who Tom Perkins is and what podcasts he's in charge of, I'd be shocked, because Daniel made sure to advertise who Tom and I were at every fast food establishment in the Southeast. So that was wonderful.
And I think we picked up a new listener from the gal at the hotel front desk. So shout out to her if she's listening to this episode. So yeah, no, it was a great trip. Appreciate you guys having me on. So we started with sheep. I guess I grew up. My dad had Suffolks all through my lifetime and started in 1969 with his lambing out his first ewes. So kind of grew up around the sheep. When we became old enough to start showing in 4-H at age 9, I think about 8, he switched over to club lambs. So grew up doing that, realizing that I didn't like shearing sheep, and also didn't like just how much care and effort you need to take at lambing time. So when I was a senior in college, bought my first group of Katahdin and Dorper ewes just to do kind of a commercial program and rotate back and forth between Dorper and Katahdin rams. And then in 2018, we decided that we didn't like the size of the Dorpers, that they were just getting a little bit too small for us. And we really liked the way the Katahdins were going. We started upgrading our flock and switched over to using only registered Katahdin rams at that time, and then have been slowly purchasing a few registered quality Katahdin ewes each year to kind of help and sell off some of the commercials. And now we're basically kind of got ourselves down to, we only had 2 or 3 of those really elite commercial females still from my original flock here this last year lambing, and we decided to add commercial ewes back in and kind of move those ewes back over into that program that are maybe not performing or giving us as good of numbers, but still do a really good, nice job raising lambs, and kind of add some of that enjoyment back into the breeding, that there's not so much data collection and paperwork and everything associated with them. Just good fun shepherding. And then I want to say after we started upgrading, we were about 2 years in, and this will be our 4th year submitting data to NSIP. So we had kicked around the idea of joining when we first started, but didn't really know too many people around other than Kathy Bielek, who was doing it. And so we kind of hem-hauled around that for a few years, and then finally decided to pull the trigger here. And I think it's been a good decision for us, helping us kind of split hairs in the flock on looking at lambs that, it's really easy to pick out that good single in the barn, but sometimes picking out a good triplet or twin that doesn't quite look as well because it's getting a third of the milk as that single is, really helps to kind of identify those better performers in those groups earlier on, instead of waiting till they're a year old to be able to take a look at them and see what they're doing. So really enjoyed that. That's kind of been our background there. We were originally located up in Johnstown, Ohio, and we're kind of neighbors. I grew up with Cam showing at the county fair, so we go back a long time there, and sold our farm and moved down here to Cambridge, Ohio last fall. So we're currently struggling with the transition to new facilities and kind of learning the learning curve of figuring out a new barn setup, that you have an idea when you build something of how it's going to work, and then when you actually get in there, it works a little bit differently, and there's some growing pains. And then we also were trying to fence in, close to 100 acres, and the fences that are here were not good for cattle 10 years ago when they had cattle on the farm, and they're really not good for sheep. So we're trying to work with NRCS and do an EQIP grant and contract with them to put in some water infrastructure as well as those fences. And through that process, decided that we were going to use the timeless fence posts. We really liked the product they had. It offered some better economic value, I think, to us, and that the fact that the posts are less expensive than a wood post, and I don't have to spend the time basically putting the insulators, threading those onto the wire, and then going back and stapling every wire to that. So the post allows us to just have the pre-drill holds. You just fish the wire through your pulling, so it takes a little longer to pull the wire, but then all I have to do is put crimps on the end panels.
It's
And
like the post is the insulator or something.
that is the tagline that Timeless Fence has. So it's a pretty neat product. It's pretty robust. If you've never handled or seen the samples, You can request a free sample kit online where they'll send out, a little 4-inch cross section of a piece of a post. Pretty heavy duty. You watch videos and stuff like that, but you don't really get a good sense for it, I think, until you see or actually feel a post on how sturdy and how rigid that PVC is. Because I always think of like, you know, half-inch PVC like water line, and how if you get a 10-inch stick, it's flexing really bad. And these posts don't really flex too much, but if you get a tree falling on your fence or anything like that, they flex, and then you're able to kind of bend them back up and stand them back up. And not going to break off like a wood post may or anything like that. Strip out your staples. So we think it's going to be a pretty good thing for us. We've had a few customers who've decided to dip their toes in the water and replace some fence with it, and we've gotten some good feedback from them so far. And just thought it was a good fit. That if we were going to use the post and there was nobody within an hour drive from us, or it was all surrounding counties or farther away, that we're the local reps. So we decided to jump in and see if we couldn't sell some posts on top of utilizing them ourselves.
Yeah, and I was one of those individuals that was pretty skeptical on that product. Again, just it's plastic. I would assume that it wouldn't be as rigid as what we might see in a steel T-post. But Tom's got it all over his farm.
Yep.
This was a couple years ago, had sent off for inquired on one of those kits that you had mentioned, and so I would highly recommend, if you are skeptical of it, reach out to get one of those and really evaluate the product in that fashion, because that part changed my thinking on it. And now we're finally at the point where we're ready to install some of that fence, and so we're probably going to go that route. So it's exciting. I'm excited for it to not mess with broken insulators all the time. And you get out to Tom's place, he does have a pasture walk coming up the 18th of July. Be a pretty fun demo of what that fence can look like, what the aesthetics of that product is, and then what the function also can be. So yeah, fun stuff. It was enjoyable to reminisce on some Club Lamb exhibition discussion. And I was a couple years behind Daniel, and was probably more familiar with watching his younger sister show, Lydia. And it kind of talked on, as a young person, you watch these older kids improve, and the ones that are elite at what they do, and really trying to glean information off of what they're doing, how they're doing it, so that you can improve yourself. And one of the tie-ins to what we're doing now is this whole weekend was a combination of new and very experienced shepherds, individuals that their entire research program revolves around sheep. And it's gleaning this information and trying to improve what we're doing as producers, whether it's seed stock, commercial. The education aspect of it is so important, and it's a group of people that really want to learn. I think regardless of breed and organization, we can really take a page out of that playbook and say, can I get out to somebody else's farm that I would view as being successful in an industry that I'd like to improve in, and going out and trying to mimic or learn from their experiences, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes, and that we can strive towards a more efficient system. So yeah, fun stuff. Tom, were you the one that walked away with the high seller this weekend?
Yep, I did.
Yep.
No,
Okay.
wait, I had the low seller this
Oh,
weekend. That's what it
well,
was.
I meant purchasing,
No,
because the
I
high
didn't. I
seller,
didn't buy anything the entire weekend.
I don't know if
Luckily,
there
when
was
I left, I'd forgotten my wallet, so I had
oh
to.
yeah. Yeah. Well, even if I would have remembered my wallet, I probably would have been out of luck, because the high seller, I believe, went for 72 100 and some change.
Yeah.
I mean, there were some sheep that sold exceptionally well. I think the high selling ewe lamb was that $2,000 mark. I mean, so sheep that had the metric to select from. All of these sheep had EBVs. Um, you know, all sold, and that top end sold very, very well. So
Mhm.
that's always fun to see. I had made a couple comments that I like the online sale format, but in a live auction, anytime you're selling animals for, thousands of dollars, it gets pretty exciting.
Yep.
So I did miss that a little bit. Some of that anxiety going into a live auction was missed, but it does allow you to make those more calculated, thought out decisions when you're on that online platform. So overall, a good sale. When we think of the root and the heart of the annual symposium, it's the education. And so wanted to pick your brain, Tom, on kind of what you sat through and what you felt was impactful. What did you walk away from Cookville with?
There was a lot of good information there. And I think one of the main things was, there was breakout sessions so that if you were a beginning shepherd, there was a ton of hands-on demonstrations. Everything from, trimming hooves to learning how to set a ewe up on her butt so you can work on her feet, or even a ram for that matter. And if you wanted to, you just raised your hand and got right in there and show you how to do it, how to put a halter on a sheep. I see so many people putting halters on sheep completely backwards to what it is, and they struggle with it. And how to tie that halter up. There was just a ton of really good information for beginning shepherds. And I stood and watched just the halter demonstration, how to tie that knot, and realized sometimes I tie that knot just like that and it's perfect. And other times I tie it and then I have a heck of a time getting it untied. And I didn't know why. And it was that simple crossover that sometimes I accidentally do and sometimes I accidentally don't do. And I was like, man, that makes so much sense. So here I am, been doing this all these years and figured that out in the beginning shepherd's part. And then in the the other room, I mean, there was information in there on the immunology and genetics, and it was like, holy cats, I'm gonna have to. I took a bunch of pictures of the slides. It's like I'm gonna have to go back and look at this again because there was just a wealth of information there, just exciting stuff. And the presenters were, we've got some of the industry leading presenters doing, putting these on, and just really, really good information.
Not only
Yeah,
was it good information, but they are energetic in the way that they presented it. It wasn't, talking about the genetics and some of the deep stuff down in the weeds can kind of put some people to sleep, especially after you've sat there and had a good, you know, barbecue lamb meatloaf lunch, and
Yeah.
you loaded up on the calories. But they kept it energetic. It kept it interesting. I think that's the biggest thing, that
Hmm.
even if it wasn't a topic that maybe was on your priority list of, oh, I'm really looking forward to going to this specific session, um, they drew you in to what information was being presented, kept it where it was relevant, and did a good job of how it was applicable to benefit your program at home, not just something that's going on at a research station at a university. Because I think sometimes there's that disconnect between, okay, we have almost unlimited grant funds to do this type of stuff on our farms, but implement it on your farms now, but it's going to cost you a ton of money to do it. I think they said, these are ways that you can work towards this in an economical fashion and still see the benefits of the research and what they're doing without having to have an open checkbook to make it happen. So I think that
Hmm.
was very good. And I think that, to me, I wish that when we were starting down the road with NSIP, that I had more of these type of sessions to be able to gather information and making decisions of how we were going. Because I think we've made a ton of progress in the 4 years that we've been doing it, But I think had we known some of these strategies and some of the thought process behind why we're selecting for certain things, understanding the heritability of certain traits, I think that's a huge thing in making decisions and, being able to apply that information. So I think, those beginning shepherds or, people just getting into Katahdins or just joining in SIP, I think it's a huge, huge benefit to those folks to be able to set through these sessions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was also fun. I know Rusty, we've had Rusty on here as the executive director of NSIP, and I'm sure he will talk plenty more in the future, but he is leaving that position with NSIP. So it was fun to get him all the way down to Tennessee to kind of give a farewell tour, really good content that he had offered up to celebrate his 4 years with NSIP. And I joke he's been there for much longer, but there's a miscommunication on the cake decorating, and it said thank you for your 4 years of service instead of your years of, of service. And he's spent a lot of time in there answering questions for producers and advocating for the use in the seed stock side of things, as well as the consumers of the product. So commercial producers buying NSIP rams, and we'll get him on here again sometime to maybe give us the 10-year history of his tenure. That might be if he'd be willing to share. I don't know, but just a really fun guy to talk to, and couldn't be happier, for the position that he's taking with Iowa State, and we certainly wish him all the success in those future endeavors. Yeah, it was fun to see, individuals like that. The pinnacle for me, my biggest takeaway was we did some livestock evaluation. So the phenotypic evaluation, you'd say, well, why do you need to do that? You're pulling all this data off a piece of paper, and then you just go out and make sure they're acceptable. And I think that's a perfectly fair point, but producer feedback, there's an interest in evaluating that breeding stock. And I had made the comment to Dr. Greiner that, well, the reason I can't get up here and talk about it is because Cameron goes in and says, yep, they can move, they can walk out to grass, they're good to go. And it would only last for 30 seconds. And so, why do you bring in someone like Dr. Greiner? It's because his mind views animals in a completely different light than what any of us do, what anybody in the room did yesterday. And the one comment that he had that I found comical, he starts off his building better Katahdins presentation with, I get paid every once in a while to go out and evaluate sheep based on the way they look, get out and do a county fair here or there, and just kind of left it at that. And, Bowdridge Andrew and I are over there chuckling like, oh yeah, get out and do a county fair. Like, he's judging the Ohio State Lamb or the Ohio State Fair Market Lamb Show next weekend. I think he's probably judged every Texas major on the lamb and the cattle side of things. And if he hasn't done them all yet, he will in his lifetime. Like I don't think people realize what the man has done, because he's humble about it. But it is fun to get him going on some of the discussion. I know Friday night we were talking about, someone had asked about a couple of rams in a pen, and the comment was made, well, are you concerned, this ram is longer, and we want to be selecting for those prime cuts of those high value cuts of the animal, and so we want that length in that loin. And he says, well, I'll tell you why he's longer, because he's taller. And it goes through these biological just knowns that how that physiology goes into making an animal, and how they're structured. It's just I'm geeking out because like just to hear him talk, he ripped apart one of the rams when we were evaluating in the pen, which he was supposed to. That was the worst sheep that we put into the demonstration pen so that people had something had something to talk about. And he rattles off like 15 negative attributes in a very descriptive. I mean, the man is bilingual when it comes to the English language in evaluating livestock. And if I leaned over to Andrew, I said, I just need to rip his vast deferens out right now and turn him into a teaser. Like it was that type of um impact. Like, yeah, this one has very little genetic or very little phenotypic value to pass on to offspring. So I'm hoping that, for those sitting around that pen, sitting in those sessions, looking at animals, um, we're able to identify the things that his eye is picking up on. The other thing I really appreciate is at the end of the day, his mindset on this is very practical. And you've got the numbers. Have you ever called one for not being they get out and move? Have you ever called one for not being sound and going out and not being able to breed?
Mhm.
And the answer was in that pen, they were all sound. They would all go out and breed. Let's get into the splitting hairs side of it. And that's something, do we need to do it? It's up to you to decide. But that for me was the most fun. The other fun thing was we had some kids involved with uh, the hands-on portion, and I was on the ear tagging station. We could have done a whole day's worth of ear tagging discussion
Yeah.
because the conversation that stemmed from that was wonderful. But there was a young lady there. She'd asked, she's like, why do you have this big yellow tag? Like that looks a little excessive for a sheep. So I grabbed that big yellow cattle tag that's got a pre-printed number and my small premier tag. I step back 20 feet, say, what do you think? She's like, well, I can see that one. It's like, yep. So those are things we're getting young people to think about certain things. So yeah, again, education wise, it was jam packed and fit a lot into 1.5 days. So it was exciting, but
Yeah, it was a good symposium. I truly enjoyed it. It's also, you go to these things and you meet people and they're far enough away from home that you're not going to see them till the next symposium. So it's always something to look forward to and sheep people for the most part are just good people. Always just enjoy talking to these folks and we can just sit around and cut up and laugh, and then you get into some serious discussions about what they're doing on their place. And I just always find that to be incredibly interesting. But so it was fun catching up with Dan and learning more about his whole operation, what he's been doing. But when you're in a truck for 42 hours straight, it's just kind of you got to talk about something.
it's true. It's true. A lot of
Yep.
lot of conversation and revolving around fence, revolving around just breeding scheme. And that's one
Mhm.
of the things I appreciate about Daniels because they're doing a couple of different things. They're not always bringing in the what I'd call traditional rams. The genes and genetics um, that we see in a lot of other flocks that because we're trying to bring in performance in certain avenues and those other flocks are selecting heavily for that. Maybe talk a little bit on just what your selection goals are and how that might differ from the traditional commercial producer.
Yeah. So, coming from a show background, I enjoy, the showing aspect of the sheep. And, personally, I think there's a huge opportunity for Katahdins in the show ring to continue to grow and to flourish. We've seen Supreme Champion U overall breeds down at Louisville a couple years ago that the Kiefer and Riviera crew had. And then, they had the Supreme Champion U out at the Midwest Stud Ram Sale in Sedalia this year. So the breed is getting a lot of popularity through that. And, getting these kids started in 4-H and showing. I mean, just looking at yourself, Cam, you got in and showed lambs, and now you're in the sheep industry and highly involved in it, from creating that love of livestock, at a young age. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us in that. And, we during that phenotypic evaluation session, we talked about if there's a ram that has no data on him, and is outside of the system, is he worth giving the opportunity to bring him in and breed some ewes and try to prove him out and see, can we bring in some outside genetics that are going to cross on these other sheep, because certain trait selections, we've talked about it with like the parasite resistance. We have 3 premier flocks in the country on parasite resistance, and most of the other flocks that are breeding for parasite resistance go back to some of the key rams in their pedigree. So we need to, the whole idea with NSIP is we don't want to get too much of too high of an inbreeding coefficient to keep that that growth and that heterozygous crossbreeding type of effect to get the best offspring. So we need new genetics brought in. And the talk, I forget what Dr. Greiner said on that, an animal with poor accuracy EVVs in his mind is still better than an animal without. And someone commented, but the gamble is you could bring an animal in and have him perform extremely well, and then you have that outcross sire. So I'm a bit of a gambler myself. So we are using good NSIP rams, but I'm also studying pedigrees of these sheep that are performing well in the show ring, and that rams are still going out breeding ewes and producing quality lambs for folks. Trying to study those ewe lines. We talked a little bit, for those that maybe listen to Robert Walker's Sheep Things podcast. He did the interview with Dr. Charles Parker, who was kind of a help with founding of the Katahdin breed, and a lot of his research at Ohio State, involved kind of what would be considered some of the base of the Katahdin breed. And he talks about those madams, those females that are just elite in the program, and trying to follow those ewe lines. So trying to study some of that for not having that phenotypic data. If you can see that this grandma and the mom and now this daughter have all produced a lot of great offspring in the show ring, there's probably some merit to that piece of genetics or that genetic line. So we're trying to study some pedigrees and pay attention to what other flocks that are being successful are breeding with, and trying to add pieces to our flock to test them against these NSIP sheep that have high accuracies. And then pairing that with doing genomic testing, we've been able to prove out some rams that we feel like have some great maternal value and have some excellent growth qualities. And our next step is looking into starting to take some fecal egg counts. And I think we had the discussion that there's definitely serious value in something that has a very high fecal egg count, showing that it's probably has some very good parasite resistance, and matching that with some strong maternal traits. That those were the animals that kind of sold at the higher end of the spectrum this weekend. And then you pair that with an excellent phenotype, then you get that $7,200 ram, or the high selling ram out of the expo last year that put together a good phenotype and an excellent package. In these sales that are not just exactly focused on the NSIP genetic side of things, that are more of your traditional visual appraisal sales. You're seeing these animals that have a excellent phenotype and then have it backed up with some genetic data. Those are the ones that are topping the sales and giving some of that peak prices. Where we're all, if you're in a seed stock program, you're trying to produce elite stock, and I think that's the thing that separates. If you can have something with good genetic data and put a good phenotype on them, those are the animals that are going to do well. And, we talked about it in the market lamb class evaluation in the demo session, that grader or that buyer at the sale barn, and, more than half of our lambs should be going into the sale barn market or into, whether you're selling direct to consumer or anything like that. If they're going through the sale barn, phenotype is what sells. That grader doesn't know what numbers they have or what's on a piece of paper. They only care what that animal looks like in front of them, because if that animal has some bloom and some fat cover and some muscle, some natural thickness, some body, those are the animals that are likely going to go hang a good carcass for them and make them money in the industry. So, I think there's some value to that, but we need to use the tools that are available. But my goal is if we can raise some good sheep and be the one to take that gamble, there's a chance if we can find a ram outside of the system that meets some of these goals that other producers have and is a complete outcross. We may strike out a few times, but we're running close to 100 ewes now and hoping to grow and potentially double that in the next few years. I can take 25 ewes and put them on a ram, and if it doesn't work out, we take him to the sale barn and that's that. But if he does work out, then there's some serious opportunity for us there, in my opinion. And I'm new into NSIP, so I don't have as much to lose as somebody who has been in it since the 1990s and started where they've worked so many generations to get to a level where they're at. It's hard for them to take that gamble. There's more to lose, more to risk.
Yep, that's so true. So we are coming up on our time here, Daniel. Do you want to give us some contact information for those looking for maybe some sheep and but maybe more with your fencing company?
Yeah, so you can find us. We're on Facebook under Ulry Farms. We also have a website, ulryfarms.com. Try to keep that somewhat updated with our current sires and winners if we've been doing any showing or anything. You can read a little more history on our farm there. Not very good at keeping the social media updated, but I try. Sometimes my wife helps me, and we're a little better at that. And then with the White Gates Fence Supply, we are also on Facebook there. So I try to sell or share some stuff on there every once in a while. So you can look us up on there. Feel free to reach out to me at any time. We can get you on a wait list for ewes or lambs, or we do keep a couple rams back. Each year we try to be pretty selective on that. So thank you
All
guys
right,
for having me.
sounds good. It's been good catching up with you guys. Don't forget there's a Facebook page, there's a YouTube channel. You can reach out to me if you want to at bigtomperkins@gmail.com. So we'll talk to you guys later.
Sounds good, Tom.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
All righty. Bye.